Hello, Facebook Live, and it's time for another edition of Tune Up Tuesday. Last Tuesday, we were in our marine department, and we talked about getting ready for the cold, wintry months that's quickly approaching us, I'm afraid to say. So we thought it'd be good to follow it up with here in the service department, looking at the automotive side of the business and the automotive services that we provide. So I thought we would do 3 tips, really, that you really need to address going into the cold, going into the snowy, inclement weather. And we can start that off with probably the most important one is tip number 1, tire condition. It's easy just to ride around every day, not really pay attention or notice the tires, but going into the winter months when you have rain, cold rain, snow, leaves falling on the ground, it's just imperative that you've got the best traction on the car that you can have. And so what I've got here is an example of a tire. This is just a simple tread depth gauge, and if we measure this tire, it comes up as 830 seconds. 830 seconds has 35% wear, so it's still well in the usable category. The tread bars typically, where the manufacturer says replace the tires at 330 seconds. Different compounds perform at different levels and different tread depths, so it really depends on what kind of tire, car, all that is. But long story short, 330 seconds, absolutely time to replace the tires. I've got an example that here, this car came in this morning for an oil change. We did notice the tires here. This is not even really measurable. It's well below the tread bars. It's got these tread wear patterns. If you see these bars right here, see how there's a little distance there, and then it's flat as it goes across. Once it gets to that flat area, that's the manufacturer of the tire saying absolutely time for replacement. So tip number 1, tire condition. The nice thing about it is all the tire manufacturers typically understand that it's most important going into winter to have good tires. So there's usually all kinds of rebates and specials that you can take advantage of. We're aligned with Michelin and BF Goodrich and Uniroyal. However, there's lots of good tires out there, lots of good people that sell tires. So tip number 1, condition of the tires. Let's walk over here to number 2. Here we've got Brent joining us, and we've got a Honda Accord and coolant condition. And what I mean by that is it clean? Is it full? Is it protected to a low temperature level? This is a fairly simple test to run. It's basically a float gauge. Tell us a little about what you're seeing there, Brent.
On this gauge, what we're looking for is 5 of the balls to float, which means it's going to be good to minus 34 degrees.
Right. So hopefully we'll never encounter anything in this area that would put us in jeopardy at that point. So this car's good, right? Coolant condition's good on this car.
Coolant's good on this one.
And make sure it's full, make sure there's coolant in the reservoir. The manufacturer has a suggested flush interval on those things. What is it typically?
Typically about 2 years, 24,000 miles on most vehicles.
There you go. So every couple of years you really need to flush the coolant. That gets, there's chemicals in there that, for corrosion resistance and such, and they protect the engine from, freezing. So tip number 2, coolant condition. Tip number 3, got an Infiniti over here, battery condition. Obviously that's, if you've got a battered battery and you go out and start the car and it clicks or slow to crank, then it's time for a battery. However, there are tests that can be performed that will show that sign's coming, and the object here is to not get stranded, to not be late for work that morning because the car doesn't start. And when it gets cold, the oil in the engine's thicker, it's harder to turn the engine over. So it's harder on the battery. So we've got a quick test here. What we got, Brent?
Basically, we have a bare voltage analyzer that will test the battery for us and is capable of putting a load on the battery to test and see what the battery is capable of. Most batteries are rated by cold cranking amps. This one is an 800 cold cranking amp battery that's in there. So typically on a battery like that, what we want to do is we hook up the battery tester, and this machine will actually load the battery, and we want to watch the voltage. Here we're starting at 12.3 volts. we want to make sure this voltage is not going to dip below 10 volts. This battery is actually maintaining 10.7, which is good. And anything below 10 volts, we recommend a battery.
Right. So at that point, this car could be starting fine, but if it fails the load test, that just means it's on its last leg. And that one day, on that January cold, wintry morning, the thing might not start for you. So it's best to be preventative about it. Go ahead and get a battery in it. All of these tests, everything's we looked at as part of the works oil change that we do. We look at several other things too, but going into winter, those three things. You know, if you are unsure about anything, feel free to come by. We'll quickly take a look at those things or call us. 896-0305 is the number here at Hubbard's Lane. And a couple other things I wanted to touch on. October, we still have a few more weeks of the Kentucky Harvest, so please bring your canned goods in. We're trying to raise as much food donation as we can. And so as you can see from last week and this week, whether you got a boat, trailer, car, or any collision work, we've got you covered at SMI. Here's another edition of Tune Up Tuesday. See you next week.